All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's NDC. It's the last day. It's the last session. And John Skeet is speaking in the other room. So thank you for attending. I'm going to make this fast, so we're going to jump in. And I don't want this to be too boring. So if you have any comments or questions, just stop me while I'm speaking. Project Kudu. All right, so anyone have seen this interface before? It's the portal, an Azure portal, through which you can bind your code repository to your Azure Web App. So once you push anything on your code repository, it will be instantly picked up by your application, and then it will be deployed instantly. Of course, supporting like the most common code repositories out there. This thing, the most beautiful part about this is that the engine behind that is doing this deployment is an open source project. It's called Project Kudu. It's on GitHub. It's active, and it's the real thing behind Azure. So before we jump into the Project Kudu itself, I'm going to brush briefly about Azure website extensions because Kudu is deployed as a website extension. But I'm not going to spend too much time on this. If you have any questions or answers, questions regarding this towards the end of the presentation, maybe you can talk about it. So the only thing I want you to understand about Azure Website Extensions is that it's just another web application that is sitting on IIS next to your web app. So it's just that. It's very, very simple. The way it's deployed, we can talk about it after the session or towards the end, but it's just that. Kudu is like this. So what's the characteristics of an Azure Website Extension? It's sitting on the same box. It's just next a node next to your web application on iOS. It shares the same quota of your resources, CPU, RAM. This is also true in Azure, so if your deployment takes a lot of time, be careful. And the authentication that you can access to Azure Website Extension, most of the time it does not have an authentication. It relies on whatever authentication layer Azure portal has. So Kudu as an extension, it's a special kind of Azure Website Extension because it's pre-installed. So once you run your web application on Azure, once you start it, you already have Kudu running behind the scenes. And it also sits in a folder other than the folder that is known for the site extensions on Azure. So if you want to build your Azure website extension, if you want it to have an auxiliary web application that runs next to your main web application, you can create your own Azure website extension. It's gonna sit in this folder though. All right. So talking about the internals of how this deployment happens. Once you create your web application on Azure, and in fact, you can do this. We can map this to locally in a minute. Your Azure Web App installed, and instantly you have a Kudu web application next to your website. And this part of the Kudu, we're going to talk about the Kudu project in general. This part is called the SCM part. I'm going to call it the SCM part. Source Control Management, Services Control Management. We don't care. The acronym is not too important. So you create your Azure Web Application. Instantly you have Kudu. And with Kudu, a Git repository is created for you, for your service, along with some environment variables that is going to be consumed once I need to deploy. So this is me. I didn't put my face, but anyway. Since I have access to this code repository, I can, if I have a web application, I can just push it to my code repository, and if I have future improvements, I can keep pushing. What happens behind the scenes is that this Git repository has a hook behind the scenes. It listens to all the events of like pushing to this code repository. What's going to happen? Kudu will be notified. It has the environment variables. These environment variables you have access to. You can add, you can remove, you can edit. That will be available for you in the deployment. Kudu will grab the code from the code repository, will grab the environment variables, and will look for something we call the deployment script. It's going to look first in your code repository. If it finds one, it will use it to deploy. Otherwise, it's going to inspect your code and see what kind of project you have, and will generate one for you. So it's going to probably check if it's an ASP.NET application, probably it's going to create a deployment script that will restore your NuGet packages, run MS build, and deploy. So once this happens, the output is generated from this build, and then eventually it'll be deployed to your Azure Web App. Also, this part of Kudu is the Kudu Sync. It's one of the tools. Now, the scenario I've just explained is the less known scenario. I just wanted to explain it before because it's crucial for the understanding of how Kudu runs behind the scenes. This, however, is the more common scenario, which is you have your Git repository on external Git repository on GitHub or VSDs, and you want to push to this Git repository, and then the deployment happens. How does this happen? Kudu is not only something magic behind the scenes. It also provides an endpoint or multiple endpoints, HTTP REST API, that you can manipulate your web application or the deployment of your web application. The most important endpoint that we are interested in is deploy. So this is the URL of your website. If your website is called My Website, the SCM URL is the .scm azurewebsite.net. So this endpoint, what will happen is if you push information for this endpoint, a deployment will happen. How this happens? You're going to grab this endpoint and add it as a webhook to a GitHub repository. Understand GitHub webhooks? Webhooks is just, and you can think of it as events on HTTP. So if I want to know about something that's happening on another service like GitHub, I can provide my interest, like if something happens, please invoke this HTTP endpoint and give me a post with this information. If I open GitHub, if I do this negotiation between my Azure portal web application configuration for my automatic deployments, and I do this on GitHub, if I go to the Git repository on GitHub and I check the settings, the webhooks part, I can see this URL is saved there. So now, I push my code to my Git repository on GitHub. GitHub will send an HTTP post request to this endpoint, sending not only the commit, I didn't have space to put everything, but it sends the commit ID, the repository URL, and a lot of more information about this commit. Kudu, on the other hand, once it receives these events, it will fetch that commit from the code repository, will check your code repository for the deployment script, and the same scenario applies. The output is built, and your website is created and deployed. So let's see some practical stuff. Oh. All right, so this is Project Kudu. This is Project Kudu in GitHub. The main part that we are interested in is Kudu itself. And you can see that it's just a nice code repository that you have access to. Now, I want to move away from the traditional way of how Kudu is presented on Azure websites. So I'm going to do this locally. What I can do is just clone the Kudu repository and set it up on my IS and just make sure that all the prerequisites are there. Node.js module, just to make sure that I can deploy Node.js applications and some other small requirements, MS build targets. But if you don't want to do this, the MS build team, the Kudu team have provided a very nice setup script that does this for you, the Kudu dev setup. It's part of the code repository. It will do this for you. I've done this before, so I can show you my IIS. So this is my default website, and I deployed Kudu here. All right, so it's just I have a single node on my IIS. If I navigate to this website or this URL, I will have an empty dashboard. This dashboard is part of Kudu, but it's not the SCM site, right? This is just a dashboard that will make my life easier, will do some of the things that Azure Portal does for me. So I'm going to create an application. If it wakes up. I'm going to call it my app, because this is the easiest name. And I will hit create. Now, what's happening behind the scenes, this as a Kudu dashboard is navigating through the APIs of IIS. It's creating an application for me, a site for me on IIS. So you can see that I have 3 tabs with a get URL and 2 URLs available for me. The first URL is the application URL itself, and the second one is the URL of the SCM site, Kudu, the Kudu SCM site. If I check IIS and refresh my sites, you can see that I have 2 sites. The Kudu _ my app. This is my application, the one I will be deploying. And this is the SCM site. If I navigate to my application, it's going to be, you're going to see it's a very simple web application. This is a default page that comes once you create a new application from the Kudu dashboard. And once you navigate to this guy, this is the SCM site. I'm hoping that you have seen it before. Have you seen it? All right. So this one, I'm going to my application. If you go to one of your web applications, I'm going to pick one and go to Tools, and then you go Kudu. You will get exactly the same site if it logs in properly, because sometimes it just gives me a hard time. Beautiful. See, this is if I just zoom in. This is the URL of the SCM site. You can see that it's just an extra subdomain on the website. So what does this SCM site? This is an interface for the engine. The deployment happens behind the scenes, but there's a lot of more features other than continuous deployment. One of the most interesting features is the debug console. So if I open this, this actually is a console that is on my server, on my web application. This is my, if I click on my, for example, the folder structure, if I click on my site, you can see all the subfolders, and you can see that also the console changes. I can run most sorts of commands that I can delete, I can create directory, whatever. Like there's investigation, if you want to do some investigations, this is awesome. You can also drag and drop files if you want to. And it can be command prompt or PowerShell. There's also the Process Explorer. You can see all the processes that are running with the SCM process itself. And it's because it's sandboxed, you can't see all the sub-processes. But if your SCM site process creates another process, like a notepad, if I run notepad from my debug console, I will see a sub-process displayed here, this is really awesome. Like you are seeing what's happening in your web application on your web server. A lot of stuff, log stream. You can, if your web application logs to your folder of logs, you can click on this tab, and you'll see the live log that is writing to the folder on your Azure, you can see it HTTP being displayed for you. And a lot of stuff. You can also, like, even the web jobs creation is part of Kudu. So if I go back to the environment here, if I go to the main part, you can also see the HTTP and REST API that is provided for you. We're going to come back for this in a minute. So you can see that this is exactly the same thing. This one is on my local host. So this is how it's running on IIS. Oh, sorry, on Azure. If I go back here for a minute, you can see that this is where I cloned the Kudu repository from GitHub. This is the solution. This is Kudu, right? And I've pointed the dashboard for this application. Check this out. This is the most interesting part. This folder is called apps. This is where, when I created my app, it created this folder here. This is very similar to what's happening on Azure, but the only difference is that the place of the folder is going to be different. I'm going to show you two things. This is the repository. This is the one that I told you about in the previous slide, that once you create your Kudu SCM, it's going to create a repository for you, ready for you to be playing with. This is your web application where it's going to be deployed. And here you can see the deployments that will happen in the future. Once I deploy, you can see meta information about the deployments that have happened. Also, one of the things that I want to show you later is the tools for under the deployments. All right, beautiful, very nice. Now, I have a web application here that is very vanilla. This is the template from ASP.NET project. I've created before. What I will do is, I'm going to, before this, I'm going to show you show you a couple of things before I clone this Git repository and add my code to. In this tab, you can see all the deployments that have happened before. Also, we don't have any deployments. It's 0 because you haven't pushed any code. And we are going to come to this in a minute. And also, we have the configuration. The configuration here is, you can do several things. You can specify which Git branch that you want to deploy from. Most of the time, it's going to be a .NET project. So you are going to be using MS Build. And this is where you can provide extra information or parameters for MS Build. If you want to do publishing for some other stuff or config for debug versus release, you can do it here. And some other more properties that you can edit. I'm not going to go through a lot of these. But the nice thing is that you can add your property. Add some properties, and you can edit, and you can delete. All of these beautiful settings will be available for you during the deployment, so you can consume. I'm going to show you this in a minute. So let's go back to our deployments. Let's copy this URL of the Git repository. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to clone it here. All right, so no, makes sense. Git clone. The mouse keeps sliding. So git clone this guy. Now I have cloned the Git repository that is on my machine, right? So it is HTTP back to my machine because it's local. dir, there's empty folder, of course. And what I will do is, I can zoom out now. I'll get my code that I have created before. Copy and paste here. A lot of code that I've been active. I've been programming a lot, so it requires some time to copy. And if I check my code here, you can see that I have some changes. I'm going to add everything, git commit, my first commit. I'm not gonna change this. I'm gonna keep it. My first commit. And now I have my Git repository ready. What I will do now is git push, and I want you to notice something. Now, what's happening behind the scenes is that I have pushed my code to my remote. My remote has picked it up, and it did not only just update the Git tree, it's also doing a lot of stuff. You can see what is the added package. You are restoring new Git packages. So what's going on? This is where Kudu have kicked in. It figured out that there is a push. It checked out my project. It didn't see any deployment script. Oh, and checked it out. Oh, okay, it's a .NET project. I'm going to provide you a deployment script that is suitable for you, which is going to restore my NuGet packages and build my project. And it's done this beautifully for me. So if I go to my application now, if I zoom out, if I go to my application and I refresh, it's going to take some time to display, so I'm not going to wait because it's the first time I hit this URL after the deployment. But I can go to my application on Kudu here. Come on. The mouse is giving me a hard time. So this is it. No, this is not it. This is the playground. This is dashboard. This is the temp. All right, here we go. Finally. So remember this, when we created my application on IIS, it created a folder for me. If you check the repository, if you remember, the repository was empty. And now you can see that it's updated. The deployments, voila, a new deployment has happened. And this is the information, the metadata about the information, about the deployment that has happened. The bit I want to show you, though, is if I go to deployments and go to the tools, if you remember, this tools folder was empty. Kudu has generated this deployment script for me. So if I open this with Visual Studio Code, this is the magic. This is the deployment script that is happening. All of this at the top, I'm going to skip. This is just the deployment script that is making sure that all of the requisites of the deployment is there. All right, so I'm going to skip this and show you the most interesting part. This is it. Here, what I'm doing is I'm restoring the NuGet packages for my solution. I'm building through MS Build. I'm executing MS Build, and this is an environment variable. And if there's no errors, only then sync the folders, deploy to www root. It's very simple. It's very nice. Now, this was very nice. I have my application. Now I want to show you the utilization of the environment variables and the properties that you can use in this deployment script. I have two test projects in my application, one called unit tests and one called integration tests. The unit tests, I have very simple test. It just asserts true, which is true. And of course, because the integration test always fails, I have in my integration test assert true is false. So let's do this. Let me show you how we are going to have our own deployment script. So I've picked this deployment script and I built on it. Of course, there's other ways for you to get the deployment script from Azure, but this is a long story from here. So what I will do is I'll go to my cheat sheet and get these two files and add them to my repository. I will add them to the root. The first file just it declares that, well, Kudu, beware, we have a deployment script here. So don't use your own. So if I open this one, you can see that it only has a command, the deployment script that we have. If I open this one though, you'll see that this is the same bit we have. The only difference is I have edited my script to do the following: build my test project. This is code I wrote, and invoke the XUnit console runner, which is gonna run my unit tests. If I have any problem with my unit tests, skip. Just don't deploy. Jump to the error page. I want you to notice something here. This guy. This is a variable name also. I'm expecting to push or to make it available while the deployment script. But currently, I don't have it. So if I zoom out and I go to my configuration, I'm going to add a property called test name, and I will put the name of the test project that I will add. Now I have this environment variable ready for me while deploying the script. If I go back to my command prompt, you'll see that I have the deployment scripts added, my custom deployment scripts. I know what's going on. It's just keep sliding. I'm going to add everything, commit, git commit -m. It's going to be cool if I do a typo again, so send commit, and then I will push. What I want you to notice now that not the same output you will see, because I have changed the deployment script, and you can see that now it's doing more stuff. There's more stuff happening, which is exactly the thing that we have done. We have tested or we have added the part in the deployment script in which we build the test project and also run. And you'll see now that here, you can see that we have run the tests, and there's 0 errors. All our unit tests ran, there's no problems, beautiful, and the deployment succeeded properly. So if I go back to my deployments tab, I will see that my second commit has successfully deployed. Beautiful. Now I want to change the environment variable. So not the unit test project to run, rather than the integration test to make it fail. And I want you to show that the deployment will not take place. Well, I ruined the surprise, didn't I? All right. So I'm going to go back to my configurations, and then scroll down to the bottom. Instead of unit tests, I'm going to say, well, integration tests. Save the properties. Now I need to change something here, so I'm going to say just new item file txt, just to be able to commit a new. And now, sorry, I'm going to push to my local remote, if this makes sense. Very nice. So I'm going to push, and the same things will happen. We'll see if we have errors. Do we have errors? Yes, we have an error. See, the unit test did not pass. If I go to my deployments, you'll see that it failed. Beautiful. A reminder, this is only the Kudu dashboard. The Kudu dashboard does not do this deployment magic. It's the SCM site. It's this beautiful thing that is doing the magic. The Kudu dashboard, all what it's doing is communicating with the SCM through the REST API. So if you don't like the dashboard, or if you have other automation that you have, or if you want to invoke these endpoints manually, this is all available for you as REST API. All right, now let's go back to this guy, an external repository. Okay, I understand that we can have the Kudu Git repository. I can push to it, and everything is going to be fine. But well, this is not most of our projects. Most of our projects we are going to have external repositories, and I happen to have one. I'll try to clone this guy. So I'm going to copy the URL and then go as a happy person, and I will paste my URL here. Now this invocation will eventually invoke the deploy endpoint that we have mentioned at the beginning. The information that we are providing is the URL of the Git repository. If I provide a hash commit at the ends of this Git repository, I'm going to deploy that commit. I'm going to retrieve that commit and deploy it. If I don't provide a commit ID, it's just going to get the latest from this Git repository. Now, if I go, can you guess what's going to happen? It's going to fail, because this is a private repository. GitHub is known about open source and stuff, but if you have a private repository, what are you going to do? Well, what you can do is you can either provide basic authentication at the beginning of the URL, which is not nice. You don't want to put your password like this. Or you can leverage some of the functionality that Kudu provide, which is awesome also. You can create a private SSH key on Kudu and get that public key, put it in your code repository, and this way you can have access to that code repository. So if you don't know how SSH works and Git, you have a private key, you generate the public key, you keep the private key for yourself, you give the public key for the code repository, and then the code repository will accept any connection that happens from someone that has this private key. So what I will do, I will cheat. I'm going to copy the SCM URL and go to an endpoint. So I'm just going to remove the previous installation I had. And you can see that I'm invoking the API SSH key. And this ensure public key, like once you create the private key for on the code repository, send me the public key so I can use it. So if I invoke this one, beautiful, it works, no surprises. I'm going to copy this public key without the quotes, and then go to my security tab in the code repository and add my public key. Now you can see how many times I have rehearsed on this. So, oh, Emad, how many times have you rehearsed? Well, let me check my SSH keys. So, I'm going to add this. Now, whoever have the private key of this public key will have access to. So if I go back and try to clone, but before I do this, I will have to do something is, we tried the HTTPS, now we have changed to SSH. So we're going to copy the URL, go to our deployment. Before we do this, just let me make sure that our application runs. Like this is the deployment that we have, beautiful. I will paste my friend and then go, and hopefully things will work. But after that invocation point, I have the private key created for me. Now you can see this. Beautiful, beautiful. Now we have successful deployment, and it's coming from this deployer. This is my path on VSDs. If I go refresh my page, you'll see that it's the code that I have on VSDs. So beautiful. We have covered so far. We have covered the internals of the deployments, the deployment scripts, how to have private and public SSH keys. Now, all of this magic is not only for you available on Kudu as is. It's not only that you have it here on local IIS where you can have it on your infrastructure, but this is the nice thing is you can deploy your own version of Kudu on your Azure Web App. So, for example, if you have waited for a feature, or if you have a repository type that is not supported yet, or like the guys have different priorities on Kudu and they are not really available for your priorities, what you can do, clone, build, or change, build, and deploy your private Kudu. So I'm going to show you my web application here as a web app. I have done this before. I wanted to do some drastic change on the Kudu deployment for this one, but of course it's going to be a little bit hard for such presentation. So what I did is the following. If it logs properly. And remember, you can do a lot of stuff with this availability. Currently it supports Mercurial, and voila. You see, this is on Azure. This is on Azure, and yet I have something different from I usually have, like on my other websites. If I can change the CSS and make it pink, I can do a lot of stuff. I can change the code. I can change the binaries. And in fact, the Kudu guys, the awesome Kudu guys, they made this very easy even for you by just invoking another endpoint, which was this. I'm not going to do it right now. I'm just going to show you. This is what I did. Sorry, this one. What is it? This one? No, this one. So I'm going to skip for this. Go towards the end. This is the endpoint I've invoked. And I just provided my username and password, my deployment credentials on Azure. I invoked this point, which is zipped. You can unzip any folder on Kudu by invoking this. You can send a zipped folder and unzip it on Kudu. If you don't provide any URLs where you want it to unzip, it will unzip on the root of the site extensions. So if I go to my guy here and check my file structure on this Azure instance, Azure Web App instance, you can see that I have a folder called site extensions, and this is where my private Kudu ended. So as long as I have this, the original Kudu will not look at the program files site extensions part. All right, so it's going to override it. All right. So far, we have seen this demonstration. Now, there's a lot of stuff also. I only showed you the deployments part. This is the API for the deployment where you provide the URL and the commit ID. There's also an API to check all the previous deployments and also invoke or deploy a previous deployment, because you can jump back and forth, or you can even check the logs of the deployment. This is all available through a REST API. The SSH one I showed you. You can also change your settings through a REST API. So you can expand your horizons and imagination of what you can do with this. Diagnostics, you can see all the things that are happening on your application. Even if it's your web application writing its logs to trace.log, it will be written to a file that you will have access through these APIs. Extracting zip files and a lot of stuff. Now, what is more? What does Kudu have more than the continuous deployment? Webhooks, I can also, I don't know if we have, I think we have enough time, surprisingly. So I can show you a webhook. So if I can do this, so we started 4:20, right? So okay, we have time. We have time. So if I go here, let me just try, because this was not supposed to be part of the presentation, but it's going to be very nice if we show it. So I started Fiddler, and I can go to the configuration. Sorry, where did it go? Where did it go? Deployments. It stinks. I know it's there. Repository configuration. Come on. Admin maybe. All right. I can't find it. What you can do is you can provide webhooks. The webhooks, you can have a list of URLs that you can invoke on the successful or failure of deployments, and you'll be notified. So it's sad that I couldn't find it. So webhooks, log stream, you can also find all the log streams that's happening on your application. Process Explorer, I showed you. Debug console, you can have all this functionality. You can have access to your console remotely. Web jobs is actually part of Project Kudu. So how continuous jobs are running and triggered jobs, it's part of Kudu. So you can even have it in your infrastructure. Now, why would you care about this? Well, first of all, you can understand what's going on behind the scenes. You are not blind anymore on how this thing works. It's all obvious. You can use it locally in your infrastructure. You're not ready to move to Azure, or you already have an infrastructure you want to leverage. You can use it locally, and finally, you can customize. You don't have to wait for the Kudu team to just add some features. Project Kudu is open source. You can find it on GitHub. The guys are really, really awesome. David Abel, the lead on the project, is also approachable anytime. He's always there. They have also a room on chat on Java, and it's always active and running. By that, I finish. If you have any questions or comments, objections. No one throwing tomatoes. That's good. Thank you.
How does Kudu support multiple environments? Staging, production?
There's the part of Kudu is this is the nice thing, is that they try their best not to deviate away from being on an Azure environment or a local environment. But since this happens, you have to. There's some code branches you can see in the code repository of Kudu if is Azure environment, or if swipe is available. Swipe is available. So if you have a slot on Azure, like if you create an Azure Web App, you can have different slots, like staging or whatever. You can configure Kudu to run the swipe for you. Yeah. But if you are running locally, this feature will not be there and just be ignored. Yes?
Probably to extend that question a bit further though then, so forgetting development, testing, staging environment, because even with the slots, they're on shared resources, so
correct.
I don't know about everybody else, but we've kept ours separate. We have multi-tenanted customers, so we would want to roll out to say 10 of these at once from a production perspective potentially, rather than
Right. So if you think about it, it's Kudu is just about being an adjacent to a specific web application. So all of the focus and the concentration of Kudu is the adjacent web application that you are going to provide the URL for and the file format. So it's if you want to have another web application, you will just have another node that will be deployed as a Kudu. So as many applications you have to deploy, you will have as many Kudu instances that are running. So there's no configurations per se, like a database that is keeping a list of all the stuff, but it's through the dashboard, you will have this functionality, but it's done on the local IIS that is installed on. All right, thank you so much for attending. My Twitter handle is Emad Alashi. Please keep in touch, and thank you for attending. Thank you so much.